everybody, and welcome to the video. In this video, we're going to be going over creating a Tic Tac Toe game. So we're going to we'll have 3 scenes in the game. We're going to have our menus, so we can go ahead and we can select if we want to play a single player game, or so we're playing against the computer, or we're going to have the option here to select a 1v1 if we want to play against another opponent. So if we select 1v1, for example, it's going to take us in here. So now we can go if player 1 is going to be X's, player 2 is going to be O's. You can go ahead and click through here. If whichever player wins, it's going to display a message letting them know they win, and it's going to give you an option to reset the game. And then also, if we wanted to, we can go into our single player mode here instead, and in here, player 1 still going to be X's, but then automatically player 2, the computer, is going to select the square that it deems necessary or that it should be selecting. And then we can go like this. And again, if whichever player wins, we have the ability to reset the game, and we can keep on playing there. So with that, this is going to be the video on how to make this tic-tac-toe game, and we'll go ahead and get started on that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name of the scene, and I'm going to call mine player or single player. This is because we're going to have multiple scenes in the game, so I don't want to get them confused here. The next thing, I'm going to go into the main camera, and I'm going to change this color to black. And then next, we're going to add some buttons. We're going to be using those for the game board. So we'll go ahead and we'll scroll out here so we can see the whole canvas. And now I'm going to move this button kind of up here to the top and adjust it to the size that I believe that I would like. I think it's going to be a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit wider. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that. And I'll move that one over to the side, and we'll duplicate that one as well and move that over here. So then I have the 3 buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and rename these here. And I'm going to call these squares. So square 1, and then square 2, and square 3. I want them to be 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So I'm going to go ahead and select all 3 of these and do Control D to duplicate them. And then I'm going to move these down. And so then I'm going to go ahead and rename these as well to 4, 5, and 6. Then I'm actually going to rearrange this side over here to make these in order. And then one more time here, Control D, and I'll grab the last 3 and rename them as well. So now that we have all 9 of these and we have them all renamed, everything is starting to look how we want the board game to be set up here. So I'm going to go ahead, select all these, and maybe move them down just a little bit. Maybe make them look a little bit nicer there. Just like that, I think. And then we're going to go ahead and remove all of the text for all of these as well, because we don't need it to be saying, we don't need it to say button. So we'll go ahead and we'll select all of the text objects here. You can select them all at the same time. Oops. And then we can go ahead and simply delete that there. And through the code, we'll have this, turn X or O based on who's clicking it. And one last thing that I want to do before we start actually coding stuff is I want to change the buttons here. So I'm going to select all of them again. And you can actually change down here, like the color that they change to when they're highlighted. I'm going to change these so it looks a little bit different. It's not going to be too big of a change, but maybe make it a little grayish or something like that. So that way, when you hover over the button, it just changes like that. So it lets the player know which button they have selected. And then the last thing here, if we make sure we have them all selected again, is we can go ahead and make sure that this are anchored in the same spot here. The next thing that we're going to want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and create an empty. I'm going to call this one Game Manager. And we're going to have a couple scripts attached to this. So then over here under Assets, I'm going to create a new folder, call this one Scripts. And then in here, I'm going to create a new script. And this one we're going to call player control or player turn control. So this is going to be used to control which player it is, or if it's the AI's turn. And then we're going to add this script to the game manager. We'll go ahead and open this script up, and this is going to be a very basic script. So all we're going to need are 3 public bools. So we're going to make these public so we can reference them from the other scripts. And the first one's going to be if player 1 is active. So player 1 active. This one's going to be set to true by default because we want player 1 to be the active player to start with. We'll do player 2 active as well, but this one will be false. And then we can also do a public bool. And the third one, we're going to go ahead and call AI active. And this one's going to be set to false by default as well. Next, we're going to want to make another script. And this one, we're going to go ahead and call game flow. This is where most of our stuff is going to be. And we're going to want to attach the game flow script here to all of these. So go ahead, highlight them, click it, and drag it and drop it down here. And now you can see that this is attached to all of the scripts. All right, so we're going to start off. I'm just going to delete all of this. We'll use a couple of them, or we'll use the update and stuff later. But for now, I'm just going to delete it to have a fresh page here. And we're going to need a couple of things. So the first thing we're going to need is a reference to that player turn control script that we have. So we'll go ahead and we will do player turn control, and we're simply going to call it player turn control. And next up, we're going to need to know whether X is clicked or O is clicked. So these are going to be serialized fields. And next, we're going to need to have a couple of bools, one for if X is clicked or one for if O is clicked. And these are going to be serialized fields. So serialized field and then bool, and then what we want to call it, I'm going to call mine X is clicked. And it's going to be equal to false by default. And the same thing here, we're going to need another one, but instead of Y is clicked, it's going to be O is clicked. And then we're going to need a reference to the text of the buttons. So we're going to make that again a serialized field. And this one is going to be TMP underscore text. And we'll simply call this one text. And we're going to want one more bool here. And this one's going to be a public bool. And it's going to be called can be clicked. So whether or not the button can be clicked. And that's going to be set to true by default because they can all be clicked at the beginning of the game. We're also going to need a reference here to our game manager. So we go up here. For example, I'm going to make this one a serialized field. This is going to be a game object, and I'm going to call it game manager. Now down here, we're going to go ahead and we will create an awake method. In here, we're going to go ahead and set our player turn control. So it's going to be player turn control, and this is going to equal our game manager and dot get component and get component of player turn control. And so next we want to set up what we need to do if player 1 clicks the square. So here we're going to make this a public method, and this is going to be void, and we'll call it clicks square. And remember now we're only setting up the first one here is we're setting up for single player. So this is going to be one player and then an AI. So this is only going to be if player 1 clicks. So what we'll do is we're going to say if it can be or if it cannot be clicked. So if can be clicked is equal to false, or if can be clicked like this with the exclamation point there. This is saying it's false. All we're going to do is return, so we're not really going to do anything. And then we'll say else if it can be clicked. So can be clicked is true. And our player one is active. So, and it's player one's turn. Then, so we're going to want to access player turn control dot player one active. So if that is true, then we'll want to do some things. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set the text of the button to an X. So this is going to be text dot text. And this is going to be equal to what we want player one to be. So X. Next, we're going to want to set whether or not X is clicked. So we're going to say X is clicked, and that's going to equal true. And then we want to set the button so it can't be clicked again. So we're going to say can be clicked is going to equal to false. And then after player one's turn, we would want to then make it the turn of the AI. So we're going to need to disable player one or basically make them not active anymore. So again, we're going to access player turn control dot player one active, and we're going to set that to false. And then we're going to do the same thing, but this time for the AI. So player turn control. And then this one, we're going to say AI active, and this one's actually going to equal to true. So now it's going to be player one clicks, going to set the text to X. X is clicked is going to be set to true. It's no longer going to be able to be clicked. That's square. We're going to change from player one being active to the AI being active, and it'll be the AI's turn. So now back here in the editor, we'll go ahead, we'll select all the squares. We're going to need to add the game manager to all of them. It's going to be the same game manager for all of them. And then we need to add the text as well, but we can't do that with all of them selected. So we'll have to select each of these individually and add their corresponding text. So square one, we'll drag the text that's underneath it and so on here. Square two. The next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to actually add an on click. So what we do when we click, so if we expand button here, we have the on click method. So we can go ahead and click the little plus here. It's going to display these three things. And what we need to do is we need to drag in the item that has the function on it that we want to reference. So for this, we're going to actually drag in each square. So with square one selected, we'll drag in square one. Click no function, we'll go down to the game flow script, and this is going to be clicked square that we're looking for. And we're going to want to do that with each one of these as well. So square two, click the plus, drag that in, and grab that function. And we'll do this for all 9 squares. And once we have that, we'll go ahead and we'll click play to test this out. And hopefully when we click on a button here, so if we have square one selected, if we click it, it changes X is selected. It should also change can be clicked to false, so it's no longer selected. If you click on square two, for example, that is selected. So that is true, and this is false. And now we shouldn't be able to click anymore, or clicking again doesn't do anything because it is no longer our turn, and it's now the AI's turn. So we'll go ahead and we'll start working on that. So the next step here is going to be the AI, and it's going to be a little bit more complicated than the player. So what we'll do is we're going to need to create a couple of things. We'll need to make it so that the AI can basically select which square it wants to click, and then we're going to have to make it click that square, and then you don't change it to the next player, for example. To do that, we're going to use some lists. And so what we'll do is we're going to create a new script here. I'm going to call this one list control. And I'm going to add this script to our game manager. So once we're inside this script here, I'm going to go ahead and delete update and these comments here. We'll leave start as we're going to be using that. And I'll go ahead and we're going to create 2 lists. So these are both going to be public, and they're both going to be list. And these are going to be lists of game objects. So we're going to put game object in here. And the first one I'm going to call squares. So this is going to be a list of all of our squares. And this is simply going to be new list game object. And we're going to do the same thing here. So this is going to be a public list. And I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to be calling this one selectable squares. So this is going to be a list of all of the squares that we can select. Then in start here, we're going to want to get a reference for our gameflow script. So we're going to say find object of type, and this is going to be gameflow. And then now we're going to need to go ahead and create our method. This is going to be a public one. And I'm going to call it get list of selectable squares. So we know exactly what it is that we are doing here. And to get this list, what we're going to do is we're going to say for each, game object. So I'm going to call this one for each square just to make it more readable inside of squares. Then what we want to do is this on this line. We want to say if the square can be clicked. So if square dot here we'll do get component game flow like it has here, and we're going to say dot can be clicked. So if this is true, then we want to add this square to our selectable squares list. So this is going to be selectable squares dot add square, and we're actually going to have this trigger off of a click. So off of player one's click is what we're going to be doing. So we're going to want to clear the old list before we do this every click, so that way it removes all of the old squares and then only adds the ones that are still not marked as can be clicked or still have that can be clicked marked. So what we'll do is we're going to say selectable squares dot clear up here before we go through the for each. And now if we go back into our editor here, you'll see that we have both of these lists. Both of these are currently set to 0. So we'll go ahead and we'll get these set up. So for the first one, we're going to go ahead and select all of these. If we click game manager, we can click the little lock up here. We'll go ahead and select all 9 of these, and we're going to add them in here to our squares. So now we have a list of all 9 of our squares. And then for this is going to, be generated as we click things. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to go back into each button. So we'll uncheck that little lockbox here. And again, we're going to need to come in here and add an on click. So we're going to want on click, and we're going to grab the game manager and list control, and we're going to go ahead and say get list of selectable squares. So we're going to want to do that for all 9 of these squares as well. So I messed up a couple of times in there, but I went ahead and I added them to the wrong on click method there, but I went ahead and fixed those. So everything is all good now. And so now to test this out, we can actually go ahead and play the game. And if we do click, we should generate a list of selectable squares, and it should include all squares except for the one that we have already clicked. So this one is going to include squares 2 through 9 since we clicked square 1. Now that we have our lists working, we're going to want to go ahead and set up the AI and have it move. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is it's going to need to be able to select which square it wants to choose. So we're going to need to do a couple of things here. Up here at the top, we're going to need to get a reference to our list control script. So we're going to do the same thing that we did here for the player turn control, and go ahead and do list control, and we'll call it list control. And we're also going to need a reference to to set up for the square that is chosen. So we'll go ahead and make this is going to be a game object, and we'll call it chosen square. And then down here in awake, we're going to need to do the same thing that we did for the player control again. So list control, that's going to equal our game manager get component list control. Now, if you wanted to, you could probably spread this out amongst more scripts, but I'm going to keep pretty much everything on this one script here for this game to make it a little bit easier. So next, we're going to need to add a method here for the AI to choose the square. So we can call this one void choose square. In here, we're going to need to set up an int. So this is going to be our square number, we'll call it. And this is going to be equal to a random dot range. And that range is going to be from 0 to the length of our selectable squares list. So, list control dot selectable squares dot count. And all we're going to be doing for this AI is setting up, we're going to make it so it selects like a random square from from a list of selectable squares that are left to select. If you wanted to get more complicated than that, you can definitely go ahead and do that. You'd have to add some additional logic there. But ours we're going to keep it pretty simple. If you wanted to, you could use like an algorithm like the Minimax algorithm, for example. That's a really popular one for this kind of game, I believe. So you can definitely feel free to look into those things if you would like. But for us, like I said, we're going to keep it simple, and we're basically just going to apply a random number here. So then now we're going to say if the count is, so if the list control dot selectable squares, the count, if that is equal to 0, for now we're just going to do a debug.log here and say something like there are no selectable squares, and we'll update this later with what we want to do. Then we're also going to go ahead and put in an else statement here. So if it's not equal to 0, so if it's any of the other numbers, we're going to want to set that chosen square so that we set up. So the chosen square is going to be equal to whichever square number that we select here. So now if you wanted to test this, we could go ahead and we could do like a debug.log, and we can debug the chosen square. We can print that out. And so then next we're going to need to set up a method for the AI to move. Just do that right above here. I think it's fine. So we're going to call this one AI move. And what we want to do is if the AI is active, so if the player turn control dot AI active, then we are going to want to, first we're going to want to choose square. So we're going to call that method. And then after that, we're going to want to set a couple of different things. So first, before we set the rest of those things, we can do a debug.log here, and we can actually log the chosen square just to make sure that we are actually getting a chosen square. And before we can test this, we're going to need to come back up here, and underneath awake, we'll go ahead and we'll set up an update method, and we're going to call AI move. And then some of the other things that we're going to want to do for the AI's move are we're going to want to set a couple of different things. So we're going to want to change the text of the chosen square. So we're going to say chosen square dot get component in children, and the component type is going to be a TMP underscore text, and that's going to be the TMP the text.text, and that's going to set, we're going to set that equal to not text.text, but we're going to set it equal to O. And next we're going to need to set the can be clicked to false. So again, we're going to do the chosen square. This time it's going to be a dot get component, and that component is going to be a tough type game flow, and it's going to be dot can be clicked, and that's going to equal not true, but it's going to equal false. And then we're also going to need to do mark O is clicked. So the exact same thing here, chosen square dot get component of type game flow. And this is not can be clicked, but this is going to be O is clicked. And that's going to be set to true. And then since we're going to be done with the AI's turn, the next thing we're going to want to do is set player 1 to be active. So player turn control dot player 1 active, and that's going to equal true. And we're going to set the AI to be false, so it's no longer active. So we'll go ahead and we'll test this out now and just make sure everything is working. So if we click the square, the AI should select a square and continue on. So everything seems to be working. You can see that the list of selectable squares is getting smaller. It still thinks there's 2 squares, but that's just because it didn't grab the last square that the O clicked on. Click that, it's going to say, list is empty and there are no selectable squares. The next thing that we're going to need to do here is we're going to add in a couple of text messages that say like player 1 wins, player 2 wins, and we're also going to set up a reset button. So if somebody wins, we can reset the game and play again. So to start off here underneath the canvas, I'm going to add a text. And this one's going to be called P1 wins. We will go ahead and we're going to update the text. I'm going to simply say player 1 wins. And I'm going to change the color. You can, change it however you'd like. You can make this look however you would like. I'm going to change mine to red, I think. And then I'm going to move this up to the top a little bit here, and also we're going to expand this to spread this out a little bit here. I want to take up the whole screen basically. And then I'm going to increase the font size here to something that fits. Something along that line, maybe 75 we'll just go with. Nice round number. And again, just adjust this to where we want it. And then, again, just make sure that it's make sure it's anchored there. Once you have that set up, I'm going to go ahead and do Control D to duplicate this and rename this one to P2 wins. I'm going to change the text on this to player 2 wins. And I'm also going to adjust the color. Maybe we'll go with like a blue for this one, for example. So we have both of these set up here. That's good. And then I'm going to, by default, have these disabled. We don't want them enabled at the start of the game. And then I'm also going to add in a button here. So we're going to add another button. And this is going to be called the reset button. I'm going to change the text on this button as well to reset. And then I'm going to change it. It doesn't, I kind of want it left in the middle of the screen here, kind of where it's at. Looks like our thing's off center a little bit, so I'll just move it to make it look a little nicer. And then I'm going to change the button color as well. This doesn't look quite that good. Maybe we'll go with some kind of a green maybe. And then we're going to change I think I'm going to change the text color as well and the highlighted colors. So when this is highlighted, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select this green, and then I'm just going to change it slightly, maybe slightly darker like that. So when it's highlighted, it'll look a little different. And then I'm going to change the color of the text from this gray to a white there. I think that'll be easier to read. All right, so now back here in our game flow script, we're going to need to add references to these things. So these are going to be serialized fields. The first one is going to be the TMP text, and we're going to call this one the P1 wins text. And we're going to need to do the same thing, but for player 2. And we're also going to need to do the same thing for the button. So we're going to need another serialized field here, and this one will be of type button. And this one is going to be called the reset button. I'm also going to go ahead, I'm going to move my update here, put this kind of in a better order, right? Move it right underneath awake so it makes more sense. And then now we're going to need to find the winners. So what we're going to want to do, we're going to need to do a couple of things. We're going to need to compare the squares. So if there are, if there's X, 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 or O, 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 all in a row, we're going to want to, declare whichever one of those it is the winner. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a bool, and we're going to call this one compare squares for player 1. This is going to take in 3 ints, so as there are, 3 squares in each row or column there. These are going to be in int. I'm just going to call mine sq1 for square 1, sq2, and sq3. Now in here, we're going to reference those 3 squares. So these are going to be TMP texts, and I'm going to call them text1. And the first one is going to be equal to the list control dot squares. So all of our squares, and it's going to be square 1. And we're going to do dot, as we want to get the component in children, because it's going to be we want to get the TMP text. So, oops. So we're going to want something like this here. And then we can go ahead and we can copy this and paste that 2 more times. So then this is going to be text 2. This one will be text 3. And then we're just simply going to change this square 2 and square 3. Then now after this, we're going to compare all 3 of these. So now we're also going to need to set up a bool where we compare all of these to a specific string. So this is going to be a bool. I'm going to call this P1 match. This is going to be equal to text1 dot text. So the text of text1, the field, and we want that, if we want to check if that's equal to, since this is player 1, we want to check if this is equal to X, and we want to do the same thing for text 2 and text 3. So now we're going to be checking if the text for each one of these squares is equal to X, and if so, we're going to say return P1 match. Now we're going to want to do this same thing for player 2. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do Control C here, paste this right below. I'm going to change this from P1 to P2. And then all we're going to have to do is change this to make sure, and we're going to be checking these if they are returning, or if they're all equal to O instead of X. And then we're going to return P2 match, and we're going to change this one to P2 match. So now we have this set up so we can compare all of the squares for both player 1 and player 2. And then after we compare the squares, we're going to need to check and see if there is a winner. So this is going to be another bool, and I'm going to call this one check win for player 1. You know, this is where we're going to enter in these ints. So we're going to do, this is going to be the horizontal, vertical, and the diagonal ones we're going to have. So for this, what we're going to do is this is going to be an if statement. We're going to say if the compare squares P1, and then we're going to fill out the squares. So this is going to be how we had them set up in the game board. So like 0, 1 and 2 are going to be on the same row. And then not only if that, but for now we'll want to check for each row. So what we're doing is we're checking, you know, square 1, that's this one, square 2, and square 3. So we're going to go through and grab all of the rows and columns or diagonals that could possibly result in a win. So the next one's going to be again 0, 1, 2. We already did. So next is going to be 3, 4, and 5. And I'm going to move these over here just to make it a little bit easier for myself to read. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste these and then fill in the rest of these numbers for the squares. And once we have all of these filled out, we'll go ahead, we'll add the last parentheses there. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to say return true. If these are true, we want to return true. Otherwise, we will return false. And we have an extra or parentheses up there. We'll go ahead and get rid of that. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be checking if the player 1 wins. So if this bool here, if this is true, and if these 3 squares all match, so if they match x, x, and x, so squares 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. here, if any of these 3 all match x, then player 1 is going to win. We're going to want to do the same thing with player 2, so I'm going to do Control-C here and paste that, and then simply change these things to match player 2, so P2. The squares themselves are all going to stay the same. We're checking the same squares, you know, so all of that's going to stay the same. One thing that we're going to need to do before I forget is for the click square here, we are moving, or we're changing, setting the AI active to true. We still want to do this. However, we're going to want to do this in its own method here because we want to have a delay to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control X for that. And then right below this, I'm going to do a new one, write a new method here, and I'm going to simply call this one update. Oops. Update, not UI, AI turn. And I'm going to paste that in here. And then in clicked square, we're going to call invoke. And then we're going to invoke that update AI turn. So I want to make sure we do our parentheses and then a comma, and then however long you want to wait. So I'm going to go with 2F, so every 2 seconds. So one of the reasons that we're going to be doing it this way is it's going to make it feel a little bit more like the AI is actually thinking before it's deciding, instead of instantly making a decision here. So here on update, we're going to go ahead and we're going to fill this in. So we're going to want to check if there were winners. So we're going to call our check P1 win and our check P2 win. Then next, we're going to want to set up what to do if there is a winner. So we'll scroll back down here towards the bottom, and we're going to do another method here. This one is we're going to call declare winner. So in here, we're going to check if player 1 wins, we're going to do something, and if player 2 wins, we'll do something else. So if check P1 is true, we'll do something, and the same thing here if check P2 is true, we'll also do something else. So if player 1 wins, we're going to want to display the text that we set up. So P1 wins text, we're going to say .game object and set active, and we're going to set that to true. We're going to want to set our reset button to true as well. So we're going to say reset button .game object and set that to true as well. Next we're going to want to set our player 1 so that they are no longer active. So this is going to be player one or player turn control dot player one active, and we're going to set this one to false. And then we're going to want to set the AI to be active. So player turn control dot AI active, and this is going to be true. And then at this point, once we're declaring a winner, so if somebody wins, we're also going to want to pause the game. So we're going to do time dot time scale, and we're going to set that equal to 0. And I actually messed up here. The AI, we're going to want to set this one to false as well, right? Because there is a winner. We don't want anybody to be able to go again after there's already a winner. And we're basically want to do the same thing if player 2 wins. So we're going to do a control C. I'm going to paste that all down here. The only difference really is this is going to be the P2 wins text. We're still going to want to display the reset button, and we're still going to want to disable both the player 1 and the AI, and we're still going to want to pause the game. So now we're going to go ahead and we'll also call that up here in update. So we're going to go ahead and say, declare winner. So back here, we're going to need to disable our reset button by default, so it's not here anymore. And then we're going to also need to figure out what it's going to do or how it's going to act. So what we'll do is we'll right click over here. We're going to create an empty. I'm going to call this one UI manager. And then I'm going to create a new script as well. And I'm simply going to call this one reset button. We'll go ahead and we'll open this script up, and this is going to be a fairly basic script. We can remove the start and update, and here we're just going to need to say what we're going to do when this is clicked. So we're going to make this a public method, and we're going to call this one reset game. One thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to unpause the game. So time.timescale is going to equal 1, and then we're going to want to reload the scene. So we're going to call scene manager, and then we'll do .load scene. And the scene that we're going to want to load is the current active scene. So we're going to call, we're going to do scene manager here again. And this time we're going to do .get active scene. And we'll do .build index. So this is going to give us the build index of the current scene that we are in. So then now back in the editor, we'll click on the button, and then our onClick method here, we're going to add a new one. We're going to add the UI manager. We're going to select the, before we do that, before we select it, we'll need to add the reset button here to the UI manager. Then now if we go back to the button, we should have our reset button function from that script, and then we'll go ahead and select the reset game function here. Now we should have everything set up how we're expecting. So we should be able to go ahead and we'll give this a test. So now if the player 1 wins, so we have to wait our 2 seconds there, and now, so the computer's thinking, and now if player 1 wins, so we didn't set, okay. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to come back here, and we'll need to set this for all of these. So we can go ahead and select all of these because they're going to be the same. And then player 1 wins, we'll drag that in, and P2 wins, we'll drag that in, and the reset button here. So now we should have that set up for all of them. And we can go ahead and we can give this another test. So we're going to do X, X, and X. So now we have, they're showing up. However, we have an issue here where both of them are showing up. So that's not good. We'll click the reset button. That does work. That does allow us to start playing again. So that's great. And then you'll notice here though that the game's not actually continuing. So player 1 could go, however, player 2 could not go. So we'll go ahead and we'll fix those couple things. To fix the game not working after we click the reset button here, it's because the game is actually still paused. unfortunately. So what we're going to do is in start method, I have one here on list control, so I'm just going to put it in here, but you could put it on a different script if you'd like. But all we have to do is we're going to do the time scale, and we're going to set that to 1. So that's going to resume the game here on start when we reload the scene. And to fix the issue with both of the text showing up for player 1 and player 2 winning, in our game flow here, what I did is I messed up and I never changed these. These are still looking at player 1, so they're both doing the same thing here. They're both checking basically if player 1 wins, and if player 1 wins, it's going to display both of the same messages. So we need to change this here. All we need to do is we need to change these to say compare squares for player 2. So I'll go ahead and update all of these here, and that should take care of our issues. So now back here in the editor, we'll go ahead and we'll play one more time here and just double check and make sure everything is working as expected. So we'll go X, X. I'm gonna try and let the player 2 win here as well and see, maybe hopefully they go here. Nope. Okay, so it'll be player 1 wins, but that'll be the end of the game, right? So now the player 1 wins, and it doesn't show both messages. We're not clicking anything else. We can click reset, we can start over, and now after 2 seconds the AI is still going again, which is great and what we would hope for here. So now we can just keep going, and again player 1 wins. So it seems to be working. We can keep trying if we wanted to make sure to try and get the player 2 to win here, but this isn't the smartest AI, so it might not, or it might take a while to do that. All right, so here we'll see we had player 2 win. It's displaying the player 2 wins buttons here. We can't actually still click anything because everything is paused, and we can still reset and start over. Now that we have the single player working, we're going to go ahead and we're going to set up the 2-player scene. And so what we'll do is we're going to actually just simply go ahead and duplicate this, and we'll rename this to 2-player. So now here we'll be able to do 1v1 instead of versus the computer. And we're also going to want a starting scene. So I'm going to go ahead and actually create a scene, and this is going to be a blank scene, and I'm going to call it, I don't know, start scene. So this is what we're going to see when we start the game. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump into this one first. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this down to black here to match the rest of the game. And then we're going to need to get 2 buttons in here. So I'm going to go ahead and go down here and create a button. The first button here is going to be, we'll call this one the, I don't know, single player button. And we'll duplicate that, and we're going to call this one the 2-player button. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create an empty, and we'll call this one the button manager. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a script. This one's going to be called scene loader. And we're going to attach this script here to the button manager. In this script, we can go ahead and remove start and update as we won't need them. And then we're going to go ahead and create 2 public methods for what we want the buttons to do. So the first one is going to be called load single player scene. And the second one is going to be called load 2-player scene. And back in the editor, before we decide how what we want those functions to do, we're going to go ahead and go up to file and build settings. And then currently we only have the one build, or the one scene in the build. So we're going to want to add this open one here. So this is our start scene, and then we're going to want to jump over to 2-player scene as well and do the same thing here. So into build settings, we're going to want to add this to the scene. And then now we're going to want to change start scene to be at the top. So start scene is 0. So then by default, when we actually have the game built, that's going to be the one that starts. And then single player, we can leave that at 1, and 2-player, we can leave that at number 2 over here. So if we jump back into start scene here, what we'll want to do is we have our buttons. So our single player button and our 2-player button. So we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and we'll just move this up a little bit, I think is all we really need to do. And then we'll want to change the text on both of these. So for single player, this is going to be, we'll call this single player maybe. And then for the 2-player button, we'll type in something like maybe 1 verse 1. So we know that that is 2-player. And then now for these buttons, single player button, we need it to do something. So on click, we're going to drag in the button manager over here. And for scene loader, we're going to select load single player scene. And the same with the 2-player button. So we'll go ahead, we'll click the plus symbol over here, drag in the button manager that has the script on it, go into scene loader and load player 2-player scene. Now back here in the scene loader script, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to decide what scene we want loaded. So we just set these up. So we're going to go into scene manager and we'll do .load scene, similar to like what we did on the other script there. This time though, we're going to enter in a numbers. So this is going to correspond to the numbers that we just set up there. So our single player scene was number 1, and we're going to want to do the same thing here, except for this time we are going to load number 2. And so now we can go ahead and we can test that out as well. We can click on play. So we're in our start scene. So now if we click single player, that should take us to our single player scene. And if we click on play and do 1v1, this should take us to our 2-player scene, which it does. So the last thing that we're going to need to do here is make the 2-player game work so we can play against another player instead of playing against the computer. So we'll jump into our 2-player scene. And for the most part, this is going to work rather easily for us. We'll just have to change a couple of things here. So for our scripts, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to take this game flow script and I'm going to do Control D to duplicate that. And then I'm going to rename this one something like game flow, I don't know, 2 players. So we'll start in the script here and we'll kind of go through and change anything that needs to be changed. And then we'll make a couple changes in the editor and we should be done. So the first thing, we need to rename this. Obviously at the top here, the class needs to match the script. And then at the top here, for the most part, all of these, we still need all of these. We still need to access the turn control, the list control. We'll still need to access the game manager, X and O. We still need to access these, the text, and whether or not player 1 or player 2 wins, we can just reuse these. And the reset button as well can be clicked. We still need, and chosen square, we're not going to need this actually because we don't need the AI to choose a square anymore. So we can go ahead and remove that. In the awake method here, again, we're still going to need to access both of these, turn control and list control. In the update, we're still going to want to be checking if player 1 or player 2 wins and then declaring the winner. However, we don't need to call AI move anymore as we won't need that. So we'll go ahead and clear that up. For clicked square, we're still going to need this. So if the square is clicked by player 1, we're going to want to, do all of this stuff still. So we'll leave this for now. I guess the one thing that we can change in here actually is we can remove this invoke and we can simply say player turn control, and then we're going to want to set player 2 active actually instead of setting the AI active. So then we can remove this update AI turn as well. We won't need that anymore. We're not going to need the AI move, so we can go ahead and remove that method as well. And we're also not going to need to choose a square since the player is going to do that on their own. So down here, comparing these squares, we're still going to want to do this, comparing for X's and O's, and then checking if one of those 2 wins. and then declaring the winner is all still going to be relevant. So we'll still want to keep doing these. The one thing is down here in the winner, we're going to want to do player turn control, and we're going to want to set, instead of the AI, this is going to be setting the player 2 to be false here for both of these. And then the other thing that we're going to need to do now is we're going to need to add another clicked square. So what do we want to do if player 2 clicks? So for this, we should be able to just go ahead and basically do the same thing here and else if. So we'll do Control C, Control V, and then on this one, we're going to check if player 2 is active. So if it can be clicked in player 2 instead of player 1, we're going to set the text to O instead of X, and then we're going to be marking O is clicked, not X is clicked. We'll still want to set can be clicked to false, and then we're still going to want to do these things, except for we're going to want to do this in the reverse order. So if player 2 clicks it, then player 1 will then be active, so we'll set that to true, and player 2 will no longer be active, so we'll set that to false. So that's really all of the changes that we should have to make in here. So back in the editor here, we'll need to do a couple of things. So if we select all of the squares, we're going to want to remove this script here. So we don't want game flow on here anymore. And then what we can do is we can actually add game flow to players instead. And then we'll need to assign our text. We'll need to assign our win text, our player 2 win text, and our reset button. And then we'll need to assign the text to each one of these squares. So we'll have to open these up here. And then we'll have to go through and assign each one of these individually. So for square 1, we'll grab the text that's underneath of that, and so on here down the line. And once we're done, we're still going to need to add the game manager as well. So we can go ahead and we can select all of these squares at the same time and drag in that game manager there to assign it to all of them. And then the last thing that we should need to do is the on clicks. So we'll go ahead and we'll need to change these. So we don't need both of these anymore. We can remove one, and we'll only need one of these. And so once we are ready here, we'll want to drag in the square that we have selected, and then go to game flow 2 players. And there is the clicked square that we have created. So we'll go ahead and select that, and we'll want to do that for each one of the squares. So again, we're going to need to remove one, drag in the square that we're on, go down to game flow 2 player, and then select clicked square. So now that we have all of those set up, everything should work now, and we should be able to do this with 2 players. So we'll go ahead, we'll save that and give it a go here and try it out. So when player 1 clicks, it's going to change it to X, which is correct. If player 2 clicks, it will change it to O. And then it's player 1's turn again. There's no delay on this one now, but then player 2 can go, then player 1 again. And we have player 1 wins. We do have the ability to reset. It stays in the 2-player scene. It doesn't go to the other scene. And then we can kind of start all over here. So XO, etc. And if we do player 2, we can have player 2 win as well. So everything is now working, and that's pretty much it for the game. So now if we wanted to test the whole thing, basically what we can do is we can jump back into our scenes here. We can go into our start scene. We can click on play. We have the ability now to, go into single player or 1v1. If we wanted to do 1v1 real quick, we can, do this XO, XO, XO. That is working. We can also, if we wanted to, back in our start scene, we have the ability now to, the player can select, if they want to do a single player, they can do that. So here we can go in and we can play the game, wait for the AI. Now we have both options, single player and 1v1. that's going for us here. And then player 2 wins. So now we can go ahead and, we can reset and keep playing. So far, everything seems to be working pretty good. I think that we're pretty much done with this game at this time. I just want to say thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next video.